Welcome back to another week. You know her, you love her. One of my best regarded episodes on trauma with Dr. Jenny Hughes. And she is back for another week. So here she is. Welcome, Dr. Hughes.
Hi. I'm so glad to be back.
I am so happy to have you back. I did want to start really quick in perfect encapsulation of motherhood, right? Like, oh, I have this exciting thing that I'm doing this morning. And my son went to bed sick last night. So my husband took him to the doctor. And of course, like, oh, we're going to call the phone number on file to see if he has strep. So I'm expecting a phone call. So I will be taking the show perfectly professional. But I think my fellow parents will appreciate and understand, like, yeah, that's how that happens. So
anyway. This is how we juggle and do the dance, right? I'm trying to kind of get away from the word balance because I think it's so overrated and not realistic.
Yes.
And have been kind of thinking more about how we sort of dance through things.
Yes, I like that, the balance versus the dance. I did a panel for a girlfriend actually, but for her work, because she's in charge of their caretakers committee. I think that's what they've kind of called it, because it's really a huge umbrella. It's not moms, it's not parents, it's like caretakers. And so and I did a panel for them, and I'm on their email list, and they call it life work balance, which I think the way that we even just
instead of work life,
even just changing, like, well, we're putting life first because work is very important and very fulfilling, and it's what brings you passion and right. So
money for your family.
But life work balance. And again, maybe I'll talk to you like, can you change it to life work dance? But I do like that very much, because I think how we describe and define things is important. So, and I actually just one more note on that is that they actually are encouraging people, because she had a picture of her and her son, a professional photo, in her email signature, because they have to have photos of themselves, or maybe it wasn't in her email signature, but like her icon. And so one of her supervisors somewhere was like, you really shouldn't put that picture of your son, because we don't want people to think, she was interviewing for a promotion, and we don't want people to think you're not be available. And she was like, ma'am, actually it was ma'am, sir. She was like, no. So now Knitty is actually encouraging people. They have this beautiful logo that's like life work balance, and all of the people in the emails that I'm seeing come in from, we obviously sent an email from that what happened in, this is a Texas group, and what happened in Texas, and everyone's beautiful little family photos. And I was like, that's really nice. Anyway, I apologize for the tangent, but felt pertinent. Yes. So I have to say, the last time I had you on, I have had so many DMs, texts, message, emails about how important that was. I've had people be like, I sent it to my sister. She's never heard of you or your podcast, but I made her listen. And then she listened to 4 more episodes, because a lot of people are experiencing trauma, and we really mislabel trauma. We really misappropriate the word. And it's really nice for people to be like, hey, what you're describing to me, that's trauma. You have trauma. Let's talk about that. Let's deal with it. So I appreciate the effort that you gave in our last episode. And I'm very excited for this one.
Thank you so much, Meg. I'm so glad to be here. And full disclosure to your audience, we had been planning to do something like this anyway, and then the Robb Elementary shooting happened, and we knew that we had to get this out sooner.
Yes, we did. We were like, let's pick something like mid-June, which is crazy because that's next week.
That's on the calendar still, but
it is on the calendar.
We then moved things very quickly, which has kind of been a pattern, a theme of my week, of just sort of like getting shit done because it needs to happen. There's so many important things that we need to do for our world. So
that's exactly right. Absolutely. And I mean, I just, it's funny. I remember that's the last time I posted on my Instagram. So we're recording on Friday, the 27th, because people are going to be listening to this next week, in a year, who knows? And they're gonna be like, wait, what? So, and I posted a couple of things, like my new podcast had dropped that day, and I was recording ad reads for some new sponsors, which was a real, I was just so grateful for all the things that are coming as a result of that. And then I didn't realize, because I was either doing that or was in sessions, and I just did not even notice, or hadn't been alerted, I should say. And then I'm just like, what is life? What are we doing? What's happening? Yeah.
So the shooting happened on Tuesday. What was that? The 24th. I guess, talking about kind of the moments we learned about it, I was in session probably. I don't know. I was sitting right here and all of a sudden my phone, like a notification went off, and it was an NPR notification because, my phone pushes those through apparently.
I was going to say somehow that got through your message accrual at the end of the day.
And it pushed it through about the shooting in Uvalde at Robb Elementary. And to be totally honest, my first reaction was just to put my phone down because, one, like I was working, but or it was between sessions or something. But also I was like, oh my God, I don't have my own kind of internal resources and ability to deal with this right now. It was another thing that it was kind of the icing on the cake of a lot of things that have been happening in my personal life, in our communities, and in our world. And we're here to talk about vicarious trauma today. And this is also like a secondary traumatic stress thing, right?
Right.
And we can talk about how those two things are different. But that was my first reaction, was like, oh my God, I can't deal with this. Like, I don't have the ability to deal with this right now. And then it wasn't until Wednesday morning that it like really hit me. And I was like, holy shit, like I can't not deal with this, right? Not only am I, a trauma professional, and that's what I do, but it was more than that. It was like, I have to actually do something for someone, for our community, for people. And it was like a way for me to cope, but also is, digging deep into one of my passions of helping people with vicarious trauma.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you mentioned too, before we even go any further, maybe you could, for some of the people who, because I told you a lot of people listened to your last episode and were like, eyes open, mouth agape, like, oh, is that what that is? Oh, what is? And so I think it would be great. Could you just define the difference between vicarious trauma and secondary trauma? I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah. So, let me start with secondary traumatic stress, because that's something that happens kind of more broadly. So secondary traumatic stress is when we learn about a trauma that happened to someone else. And it is so intense that we experience it internally as traumatic. So like it, for people who were around during 9/11, that was kind of when we first started learning about this, because it would just kept playing on the news. And granted, there's been many other like catastrophes since then, the same thing happens, but it was actually because of 9/11 that the DSM started to separate out sort of like actual trauma experiences and exposure, like secondary exposure, and whether or not that qualifies as PTSD. We can sit here and debate that. I don't really care, but every trauma is trauma, is what I mean when I say I don't care.
I know what you mean. Like, I don't care about your secondary trauma.
Right, exactly. But it's that experience of, oh my God, there's another fucking school shooting, right? 19 fourth graders were murdered and their teachers. And I am having a reaction to that because it scares me for the safety of my daughter, who's in fourth grade going into fifth grade. It scares me for what the hell is going to happen to my 1-year-old whenever I send her to school. Like that reaction of like, oh my God, I can never let her leave the house again.
Truly. And it's funny because if I may jump in, we have been looking, my son will be 3 this summer, which don't get me started. You were there when he was, crazy, and so we've been looking for like preschools because he's doing really well academically at his little Montessori school now. And we were like, oh, that'd be great. And also, I'm not going to lie, it would have been nice to save a couple dollars.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, no, I'm going to continue to pay for this tiny little Montessori school because that I would hope. And you never know. You just never know. But in my mind, I'm like, this tiny little house versus a proper brick elementary school.
Right. That's secondary traumatic stress, because your brain is like, oh my God, this actual school is a target.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So anyone is can experience secondary traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm.
Vicarious trauma is something that is unique to people who are in a helping profession. So therapists, of course, psychotherapists, any kind of healthcare provider, whether it is a nurse, a doctor, a physical occupational therapist, respiratory therapist, a tech, like EMT, I don't care what you do.
Yeah.
If you're working in healthcare, you're a helping professional. Our first responders, of course, also teachers and educators, and any other kind of healer. I mean, I think about like yoga teachers and coaches who are working with people to help them. And whether any of these people are actually, you know, like exposed to trauma on a daily basis, like first responders, or, you know, working in a trauma center, or doing, you know, trauma therapy, they're all exposed to stress because people are coming to them for help because they need these people to heal them, to heal their physical ailments or wounds, to heal their emotional wounds. And so vicarious trauma is what happens to these helping professionals, where over time, because they are empathic, because they spend every day serving others, they act as this sponge and soak up that stress from all the people that they care for. And this is not a bad thing, but it is an occupational hazard, is how I talk about it. And so, like, don't stop being empathic, because that's what makes you amazing at your job. But also we have to first raise awareness about vicarious trauma, because without naming it, a lot of people can be worried that there's something wrong with them, right? That they're, you know, going crazy or whatever.
Right.
And by naming it, we can actually help people start to tame it, which is how I like to talk about in terms of like learning kind of, okay, how can I just like cope with this on a daily basis? And then eventually reframe it, which is that transformation piece that comes out of all the work you do along this journey, and the ways that you can then start to really thrive in your work again, and to fill your cup up with the work that you're doing with the people you're serving, because you see all of the ways that they overcome stress.
Amazing. And I love, first of all, name it, tame it, reframe it. Love that. That's amazing. And it's so nice to know the difference between that, because again, I think I talk about Brene Brown way too much on this podcast and in life, but she does talk about I get it wrong, 87 different emotions, and how important it is to use the right words for when you're expressing how you're feeling. And I think it's very important to make sure that we understand that it exists, secondary trauma, vicarious trauma. And because I imagine there are people who are listening right now who are like, wait, I'm a firefighter. I'm a helping professional. Oh, vicarious trauma. That certainly, you know, like you just kind of have opened some minds of being like, oh, that applies to me. Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. And it's really funny. I'm like debating on whether or not to say this, and I'm going to, because I've already started. Obviously I've made my choice, but it makes me think of this, the way you were describing that, of like being the sponge, and then like, who's going to wring us out? Like you're my chamois and you're going to wring me out, or, you know, it makes me think of a Lincoln commercial, I think it is. And it's
like the car.
Yes, I know. Like, where are we going, Meg? Matthew McConaughey, and he talks about like the point of it is the comfortability of the inside of this car, and where does stress go? And like in this commercial, like this person in the car, their stress is, you know, metaphorically going out into the world, and then someone like the bottom of their grocery bag rips out, or somebody else, something happens to their lawn. I don't remember, obviously I don't remember the commercial very well, but I thought it made me think of that though, because it's like, that's why we have therapists as therapists.
Right.
Because when we sit with people and we hold them for a living 5-6 hours a day, where does then that stress, of course, certainly we don't, it would be nice if we could fully take someone's stress from them and then but it doesn't. So then it made me think of that, of like, and then if you are a helping professional, it does not need to stop and sit with you. And I'm obviously biased, and I say this almost every episode too, like I think everyone would benefit from therapy. It's very important for helping professionals to have that, because where does stress go? It's just going to stay with you in that sponge. And if you don't wring it out somewhere, to go with that metaphor, a lot of things can go sour from that.
Right.
So I appreciate.
And one thing that is important for people to know about VT, about vicarious trauma, is it is not a mental health diagnosis or disorder. I want to say that very loud and clear. It doesn't exist in the DSM, right? Certainly people who are in helping professions like first responders can develop PTSD because of the work that they do. Yes. But that's different from vicarious trauma. Right. And so vicarious trauma is this occupational hazard. I've been writing a lot about this lately, and thinking about, how like there's been a big movement in like corporate world of like, you have to get your ergonomics people, and like they'll like actually send like some like ergonomic specialist to your desk and like make sure everything's right, because an occupational hazard of our corporate life and sitting life is a lot of like issues with your body.
Yes.
So I think about VT in a similar way. Like it's like, okay, let's call in our VT specialists to get us set up so that we don't, like whatever, just like we call in our ergonomic specialists. So
I mean, it makes me feel optimistic and hopeful in a world where I feel very helpless, especially in light of last week. But to see the things like people wanting to put together a committee to focus on life-work balance at a corporate, and this is a corporation that makes a ton of money, and like the bottom line is the bottom line, and also how are we going to help our carers? And hey, we realize that people are getting a lot of carpal tunnel, and perhaps maybe it's an opportunity for them to decrease their insurance claims on wrist surgery. But like, okay, but both can be true. Like I'm decreasing my bottom line on my insurance costs and whatever, because our premiums are going up, because whatever. And also I am making a better life for my employees who come and put their butts down 8, 9, 10, depending on where you're working. I used to work on Wall Street. I don't know how many hours I'd spend a day there, but So it does give me a little bit of something of like, even if it came from a place of decreasing the bottom line somehow, at least there is a benefit that's happening. And again, having opportunities like this to talk to people like you who can say like, this is what this is. Let's name it, tame it, reframe it, and move forward. Absolutely. Yes. So should we just, now that we've defined, should we just jump on into the topic of, I mean, how, I don't even know where to begin, honestly, because how do we go from here?
Well, I mean, I don't know where we go from here, right? As a larger
I meant in our
country,
conversation,
but
not Dr. Hughes, please fix the world.
Right. Well, but that's a question that, I mean, legit, like people ask me. But I think,
a lot, yes.
One place that I do want to go from here is talking more about kind of allowing the work with vicarious trauma to fill up our cups. And that's actually called Vicarious Resilience. So it's two sides of the same coin, right? Where helping professionals have an occupational hazard of vicarious trauma and an opportunity for growth through vicarious resilience. And that term actually came about in 2007. There were some researchers that were interviewing therapists who worked with people who were like kidnapped and like experienced political violence and all this crazy shit.
Yes.
And it was a small study. It was just 12 therapists, but it was a qualitative study. So they interviewed them. And through these interviews, they weren't even looking for something like vicarious resilience, but they started noticing these therapists kept talking about all the ways that their work with these people who experience really true human suffering actually transformed the therapists and expanded their worldview, because they saw their clients grow and heal and experience and go through their own transformations, and to be able to take this terrible experience and not, like forget it and say it never happened, but to integrate that into their life. And so that was kind of the first research that started coming up about vicarious resilience. And these researchers were like, oh my God, what the hell is going on here? How could these trauma therapists like say that doing this work is helpful for them, right? And then since then, there's been more and more research coming out, but it certainly is a lesser known topic. But what we know about it from the studies is that vicarious resilience, so from an academic perspective, it is the way that we are able to sort of, view stress and trauma in a different way, because we watch people grow through it. In everyday sense, it is those experiences that I have both with my clients in therapy, but also in working with other helping professionals, where we're both brought to tears because we're so full of gratitude, right? It's those moments where I may have had a really tough day, but there also has been a lot of growth that I've witnessed. And then I'm able to hug my kids and really feel their bodies against mine, right? Because I'm so much more in the present moment.
Yes.
And that experience of vicarious resilience is something that I really hope for anyone out there in a helping profession, because it helps us to remember why we do this work, why we're so passionate about it, and that even when our days can be so draining, that there are reasons that we stay in it.
Right. Absolutely. I do. I love that. And I like how you were just describing like grounding yourself in the present moment by like physical touch of a loved one, and being, and we talk about, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and of it all. And because I think that's something that people do experience a lot in this insane world that in which we live. And it can make your head spin, the feeling of helplessness, and you want to do something and you want to fix something, right? What's next? How do I fix this? And then it can be very easy to spiral. I caught myself doing it a number of times this week, and I was able to bring myself back, utilizing those coping skills that I love to espouse the virtues of. And that is one thing very much. Absolutely. And I think a lot of us said, like, we're going to hug our children a little tighter this week. And I definitely used that. And, when I was asked to come back in for an extra hug at bedtime, I was like, yep, yep, absolutely. Like that's not a problem. And so I do think it can be very helpful in these ways. And it is nice to be able to reframe. I've had some clients, patients in the past who every so often I'll get an email in my professional email, and just a check in, hey, 8 years sober, or hey, whatever it might be. And we don't do it for that. Like, we just want to be able to help people. And also, as soon as you were describing those things, I was thinking of the wins of the people that I've seen who've made those choices, who've said, I'm ready to change. I'm motivated to participate in this process. I want to move forward. And I do think about that because you said, remember why we do this work, because when you put yourself there for so long, the sponge gets full.
Right. Well, and vicarious resilience is something that is sort of born out of the work that we do as helping professionals. And then I think, to kind of use some EMDR language, we can install and enhance those resources for all you EMDR folks out there. You'll know what I'm talking about. I love the language that they use in EMDR, but we can install, enhance that vicarious resilience through our connections with others. So whether that be going in for an extra, hug at bedtime, connecting with another person right now, right? And especially connecting with our communities of helping professionals, because, I can't talk to other people about the work that I do. They didn't sign up to do trauma work. There's HIPAA, of course, but what I'm thinking more is like, my husband did not sign up to be a trauma therapist. And frankly, I don't think it's ethical of me to, above and beyond HIPAA, to share the kinds of things that I do every day, because that's not what he signed up for. And so it's only with other helping professionals that I can really talk about it and be really frank and honest and open, and be like seen and heard, because they're the only other people that can possibly get it.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned that again, HIPAA.com, HIPAA.
Yeah.
But even in which is why I think we might've talked about it in the last time, or maybe we didn't, but you and I are in a monthly supervision group where we can come and talk. And if we have tough cases, I was grateful for the opportunity. We had a small group last time, and I had a case where we've gotten a lot of work done. And also I'm like, what am I missing? There's something else. And it's so nice to be able to have that in that safe space where we're all HIPAA compliant and everything. But even in like personal situations that have happened in a secondary trauma kind of way to me, and I want to discuss that with, my husband or a trusted loved one. And I'm like, okay, but I'm not going to share this piece because I don't want him to have that information. That's not even as just a Joe Schmo on the street. Like there are times where it's like, I don't want to traumatize somebody else with this information. And I obviously am grateful for the training that I have to be able to say that. Like, 15 years ago, I'd have been like, oh my gosh, this happened to so-and-so and this and this, and I've been like, oh wow, that's a lot of information. So it's nice to be able to have that like filter, and then also to be able to take that to a helping professional where I can fully express myself and be able to process through that way that's useful and helpful. Yeah.
And, we want to have our communities and our support systems be varied in the ways that you're describing. Yes. And so knowing like, okay, these are the things I can talk to this person about or this group, and these are things for this other group, because just like in our personal relationships, like no one person can meet all of our needs. Neither can, our communities, no one community can meet all of your needs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's very helpful to have that. So, and that's what's so nice about that. And that's, I think I might be jumping ahead too far, but I know that you have a community that's coming up where you're talking about that. I'd love to hear a little more about that. And then we can obviously continue to talk. I was going to save it to the end and be like, where could we find you? But it just feels like such a natural, organic transition into that conversation.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I'm working on. So one of the things that I did on Wednesday, the day after the Robb Elementary shooting, back up. So what I've been working on prior to that is developing a community specifically for trauma therapists right now.
Yes.
It is going to be called the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective, and it'll be a membership site. And it will be a space, I'm making it specific to trauma therapists because we are the ones that do so much work around vicarious trauma and serving others. Yes. But there's not a whole lot of spaces for trauma therapists to receive that kind of support amongst themselves. And so that's what I had been working on prior to the shooting and during all the other shit that happens in our world. And I had this like Facebook group like name that I like kind of saved it. I made the Facebook group so that the name would be there. Yes. And then on Wednesday, I was like, oh my God, I have to do something. Yes. And so I decided to turn on the Facebook group, and it's open to any kind of helping professional. So the Facebook group is separate from what the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective is going to be. The Facebook group is called the Brave Vicarious Trauma Community. Okay. And it is free. Anyone, any kind of helping professional can join it. And just in a couple short days, we've grown our community, and we are talking about this stuff in there. We're introducing ourselves, and we're noticing even, between so many different kinds of professionals, the overlaps in our experiences and the gratitude and the growth that we are able to get through sharing our own stories. Yes. So those are two separate things, but they are all in the service of naming vicarious trauma, taming it, and then reframing it together. Because especially when it comes to vicarious resilience, like I said, the way that we really install and enhance those skills that we kind of learn to use on an individual basis is through sharing those resources with others and sharing our experiences in a space where that others are going to get it. They're going to hear you.
Yeah. I'm so excited to hear that, because it is, I like how you mentioned too, specifically, like you all, we're just going to keep riding this sponge metaphor until it dies, but like you are like the sponges of the sponge of that. And then even somebody with me, I specialize in perinatal, and there is trauma in perinatal experiences. And I also see clients who are not, like, I see other clients, but that's where I like to focus. And so for you all, I mean, I truly couldn't really fully relate to some of the stories that you have to deal with and have to consistently hear. And so that's so exciting that there's a space where people can come and be like, oh yes, I relate to that. And I validate that, and perhaps even offer some, moments of victory, and instill hope. So that's really exciting. And so, so I'll be sure to put the Brave Vicarious Trauma Community Facebook group in the show notes.
Yep. And then for the collective, so it's not going to be launching until the fall. But in just a couple of days, I'm going to open up my wait list if people want to start to connect with me and to learn more about it, and to start to receive emails from me.
Yes.
And so for anyone, and I define trauma therapist very loosely. So if you do trauma work and you are a psychotherapist, and you identify with that, then by all means, please check us out. But people can go to braveproviders.com/VT tracker. And there you'll get a free download. It's a tracker that I've created to help people just become more aware of the way that VT shows up in their life. A lot of times, because it is this cumulative, gradual process over time, I kind of call it the slow creep of VT. It can be like, one day you're fine and the next day you're not, and you don't understand why. I mean, even yesterday, I think this is a combination of a lot of things, VT, secondary traumatic stress, but like my body just like started shutting down, and I started having like really weird pains behind my shoulder blades that I have never experienced before. And I was just done. Like my husband was really worried about me because I was so spent. Right. And that is an extreme example. And I got a good night's sleep last night and I'm feeling a lot better. But, VT, it can creep up on you. And it's like one day it wasn't there and the next day it is. And so the tracker that I've created helps people to kind of go through and think about how VT shows up for them emotionally, physically, relationally, and occupationally. There's a little checklist in there. And then there's an exercise where people can kind of track that stuff over the next week, just to get a better idea of how is VT showing up for you. So then you can kind of be more informed of how you want to take care of yourself and engage in that dance.
Right. Amazing. Very, very good. And I love that too. I have, basically, if you start therapy with me, I'm going to talk to you about a mood tracker. I can't think of a client in any recent memory that I don't have doing some form of that. And again, not to scare anybody off of like, you have to track every hour of every day. I always say, like, if you track one thing, that's more than you were doing in the past. And it's so helpful because, like you said, the slow creep, which I love that. I mean, I love the expression. I hate the slow creep of vicarious trauma, but love the expression because it is true. And when we're not even aware. So I talk about kind of like going through life with intentionality, and that's what's helpful with the mood tracker. But it's like with vicarious trauma, it's not like there's some sort of scale. Well, I guess you could, that's what the tracker's for, but like, it's not like you can just constantly know. And that's what this is very helpful to say, like, okay, well, that one hit me here at this, and that one hit me there at that. Whereas with just a mood tracker in general, I've had people be like, I recognize that when I don't track is when I'm at my worst. And then I can go back and look and see like, oh, wow, I went a whole week then. Didn't write anything down, or in, apps, God bless technology. And then it's like, well, what happened that week? And then we're able to go back and have that conversation because we know, like, oh my gosh, the second week in May, I didn't write anything in my mood tracker and I'd been doing pretty well. What happened? So, so it's so nice that you have that tool available. Again, braveproviders.com/VT tracker. I'm going to put that in the show notes. So that's really very, very helpful. And it's just, the power of writing things down and being aware of, again, that intentionality of like, I'm not just going through the day. I am
Right.
I am focusing on what is happening and what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, I mean, whether we're talking about VT or anything, people worry that by naming it, that by giving it attention, it's going to make it feel worse. But in my experience, it actually helps to subside some of that pressure and tension. I often use the metaphor of like a tantruming toddler. Whether or not you give them what they want, they are amping up and amping up and amping up because they want to be seen and heard, right? And so when we find ways to let them know, I see you, I hear you, whether or not you're going to get that cookie, that's what helps.
Snacks.
I know. Oh my God. Booty for pirates. Booty.
I knew, girl. I was with you. I see you.
Oh yeah. But you know, it's that being seen and heard that it releases so much pressure. And so it's seeing the elephant in the room, right? Any metaphor you want to kind of use. And so I encourage people to use tracking techniques so that they can learn more about those patterns, so that they can have more data to make informed decisions about how they're taking care of themselves and anyone else that they're responsible for.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. And I like that, you know, we talk about, so this summer I'm teaching suicidality assessment and self-injurious behavior, and which I'm really excited about, but also like what a topic. Yeah. So I think people get kind of, you wouldn't because you're a trauma therapist, but people kind of raise an eyebrow, and I'm like, I'm so excited to get to teach this class. And people are like, really? You want to talk about suicide all summer? I'm like, well,
yes, please.
Helping people to help people who are experiencing self-injurious behavior. And anyway, but we talk about, that's one big thing. They're like, well, if you mention, don't talk to people about suicidal ideation, because if you bring it up, and it's like, no, it's the opposite. We're naming it. We're claiming it. Do you feel like you want to hurt yourself in some sort of way? Yeah. And it's quite the opposite. It's not, let's not ignore it. Let's not sweep it under the rug. Let's bring it to the light, and let's make a plan.
Yeah, totally. Going kind of on this topic, going down this tangent, one thing when it comes to naming it, one thing that happened to me a few years ago with a client is, in my like intake paperwork in my private practice, I have it worded, when was the last time that you thought about hurting yourself? So it's not have you ever, but just assuming, because like, you know, so a vast majority of people have thought about that, or have thought like, oh, it's just not worth it, right? I don't want to go on like this. And so I use that language intentionally, because I'm just assuming that you have had that thought at some point in your life. And I want to open the door to that.
And how lovely, and even in new client paperwork, to feel validated. Like
oh yeah, that was the point of my story. My client actually said, I'm so glad you worded it that way. I've never had anyone ever, because she's been in therapy, but I've never had anyone word it that way. It felt so much easier to answer that question because of the language that you used.
Right. And I love that. I might have to borrow that for my own paperwork, because I think it is. I think, thank you. I just, in a sentence, validation. I am putting it out there in all of this paperwork was not written for you, specific Sally Sue over there. This paperwork was written for everybody. It's standard boilerplate, new client paperwork. When?
Right.
Not not if, when. I love that. That's really great. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. I mean, that, I think that's the thing, is that a lot of people still continue with, so many strides have been made to decrease the mental health stigma, and so many communities have been established, and social media has some positive benefits, right? But we still have people who struggle with, it's just me, I'm crazy, I'm wrong, the shame of that, versus you know, like, oh no, there's normalization in that.
And that even happens for helping professionals when they're dealing with stuff like vicarious trauma, right? I did a lot of interviews with trauma therapists in developing the curriculum and stuff that I'll be using inside of the Trauma Therapist Collective. And literally coming from trauma therapists, they said, like, when VT has shown up for me, I literally was wondering, like, what is wrong with me? I'm not normal.
Yes.
And like trauma therapists said that, right? Like,
yes. Well, because we're supposed to be impervious to it.
Right.
We know all of the things. We know all the steps. We know all the skills. We know the tracker. We know all the I know what I'm doing, and it's all fine. And I'm going to be able to be impervious to the stressors of this job because I have such good training and I do all my work. And then it's like, ma'am, no. Ma'am, sir, they. I always say, I don't care what your gender identity is. I say, ma'am, like, ma'am. So that's not specific, but yeah. And even the people who do it for a living every day. So I hope that people who are listening or watching are able to say like, oh, okay, so it's not just me. It's not just me. It isn't. And there are things that can be done. And that's what's so great about it too, going back to the vicarious resilience, is the ability to see the hope.
Right.
And we talk about that and, like in holding, again, specifically for me in perinatal, but just generally, like when someone comes in and they just are to a place where they're just so beat down that and it's like, well, but my job is to let you know that things can change and to be able to say like, and I got you. We've got this. It's, I wish I could give you a checklist and you'd be better by tomorrow, but we're going to do the work and we're going to get there. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I said, sorry, I kind of took us to a different place in a different
connected
time, but it's all so interconnected. So yeah. So, so what else? What else are we talking about today?
I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Yes, I think so too. I wanted to make sure I gave you space if there was anything else you'd like to discuss. Yeah. Well, so I've already so I take my own little show notes. One day I'm going to be so fancy. I'm going to have a producer who sits and listens down and takes all the show notes for me, but currently it's just a little on me. So I've got the braveproviders.com/VT tracker in the show notes. Of course, the Brave Vicarious Trauma community and Facebook in the show notes. Do you want me to go ahead and put the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective? Is that okay if I put that in there and people can kind of stay up, and you're going to open your wait list soon, right? So
yeah. So with the collective, if people want to get on the wait list, go to the VT tracker link that you just read out, and then they'll put in their email address, and then they'll get an email from me to get the tracker, and then they'll keep getting more emails from me. Fantastic. So with all my musings about things like vicarious trauma and vicarious resilience.
Yes, absolutely. And then you are Trauma Queen PhD on Instagram. And I'm going to get it wrong. What is your website? Should people in Texas want to find you?
So my therapy website is jenniferhughesphd.com.
Yes. Okay. I thought so. And then I was like, wait, is it traumaqueenphd.com? That's not right.
It actually is too. That also redirects because I wanted that domain name.
Hey, get them all, right? Yeah. Absolutely. I just want to make sure everyone knows where they can find you.
Yeah. And then I'm on Facebook too. You can follow my page. It's just Jennifer Hughes or Jennifer Hughes PhD. I don't know. I have like a professional business page on there too, but yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we do have it in the books for June, and I'm going to keep it because we're going to talk about other stuff. So people get excited. She's coming back. Back. But thank you again for your emotional and intellectual labor today and sharing this. It has been a week, last week in Buffalo, and just, and so it's been hard for all of us. It's been hard for the helping professionals. I'm not going to even go into it and how difficult it's been for everybody. So it's nice that we have a space like this to be able to discuss.
Thank you for creating this space, Meg.
Yeah. I always close with Walt Whitman, be curious, not judgmental. And I just wanted to take a quick moment I've said that so much. I use it in my practice a lot now because I've always said, we've always talked about like not judge, like I feel this way, feelings are not final, experience it like a wave, all of that, and judging yourself is only making it worse because now you're mad at yourself for feeling that way. But it continues to be so. I think even in our interpersonal conversations, being curious and not judgmental, if the first thing that you do is have an automatic negative thought of judgment, it's an automatic negative thought. Again, don't judge yourself for being judgmental, but recognizing it and then saying, okay, maybe I didn't understand this person's Facebook post. And if it's really that important to me, I can text them on it or call them and have that conversation and ask them from a place of curiosity. Like, I appreciate you in my life. I want to understand this more, etc. Yeah. So, I feel like I've overused it the same as I overused Brene Brown, but I just am bringing it back every time to be curious and not judgmental. So I hope everybody please know that you're not alone. We are all struggling. We are all have our own various reasons why this hit us with secondary trauma. If you're feeling it, talk to somebody. You don't have to have children to be upset about this. You don't have to be a teacher to be upset about this. You don't have to I'm not going to list everything that you don't have to have. You be upset and do something about it, please. We're all here. So again, be curious, not judgmental.